Hello, my friends. It is Saturday, April 19th, 2025, and there are three big stories for today. When I do the three big stories segment, I'm trying to make sure that I'm covering the three things, or sometimes it expands to five or seven or whatever, that are most important for Ukraine. So I'm looking, and sometimes that spills into something more political or beyond Ukraine's geography, but I'm looking at just the things that are going to have the greatest impact. So let's look at what's going on in Russia. The exhaustion of Russia's vehicle fleet is becoming increasingly evident. The reduced use of armored vehicles and the growing reliance on civilian, including motorcycles, golf carts, and vans, continues to signal a degradation in Russian maneuvering capabilities. So we've seen that. Like if we look at the last couple of days, this is today, we see only like 14 tanks and 9 armored vehicles off the battlefield, but we see 208 vehicles and fuel tanks. And then yesterday we saw 8 tanks and 40 armored fighting vehicles that are lost, and 312. That's 520 civilian vehicles or fuel tanks or things along those lines that are off the battlefield. The increasing dependence on that is becoming very difficult for Russia. Russia's in the beginning of a new offensive. And in this new offensive, they're not going to have the same kind of armored protection that they had going into things. They shot a train, tried to attack on a train today. Go back to my daily brief if you haven't seen that. That's nuts. They try to put plate armor on it, and the drones just went after the wheels. Okay. Meanwhile, Russia wants to replace Moldova's leadership with pro-Kremlin puppets and use the country against Ukraine, warns President Maya Sandu. She emphasized that Ukraine remains Moldova's shield. And then she said this weird thing about how they have a moral duty to stay out of Putin's war. That's a little weird. But I highlight this article because this is what Russia wanted to do to Moldova, to Ukraine, to Georgia, to Romania, to whoever, right? Okay, so they're doing this. They're trying to replace the leadership in Georgia right now politically. Because they weren't successful in Ukraine, that's the only reason that there's a hot war there right now. Because if there was a puppet government, there would be no war. Okay. Russian FSB is checking the leadership of the Federal Taxation Service. The reasons may be both economic and political, and it's both bad news for Russia. The FSB is conducting searches and seizing documents from high-ranking officials of the executive body. Among the possible reasons are corruption. It's a perennial issue in Russia. The economic reason for such searches may be a drop in tax. That's non-oil gas revenues, non-oil gas and oil. Set oil and gas aside. Other revenues, non-oil and gas revenues, were supposed to grow by 18.3% to 29.3 trillion. That's rubles, and 356 billion dollars, right? Okay. The actual growth from the first quarter amounted to 10% in annual terms. That's even lower than inflation. And that indicates a decline in tax collection. The decline is partly due, at least, to reduction in imports. Okay, that makes sense. But if the current dynamics of non-oil and gas revenues continue, the budget losses will amount to another 2 trillion rubles, or 24.3 billion US dollars. If the trend continues, experts predict a budget deficit 5 times higher than the finance ministry's plan at 6.5 trillion rubles, 79 billion US dollars, instead of the 1.3 trillion or 15.8 billion US dollars. That's going to be bad news. Now, there's another reason why they're looking into this. The political reason for the searches may be an attempt to curb Prime Minister Mnuchin's ambitions. Sorry, I said it wrong. Mishustin, came to government from the post of Director of Federal Taxation Services. He is the highest-rated politician after Putin. According to the Constitution, if something suddenly happened to Putin, the prime minister becomes the head of state for the period until elections. So he's generally considered the leader of the group of the elites that distances itself as much as possible from the topic of war. He's most acceptable to the West, and he's the guy that would, if something happened to Putin, he's the guy that would be in charge. So Putin sees that as a legitimate threat. Okay, let's turn to the next big story, second big story. So yesterday I talked about how Trump was saying he might walk away from negotiations. Rubio said the same thing. And he called what it looks like he's calling Ukraine fools and horrible people. He was saying if one side walks away, then they're fools, they're horrible people. Okay. So why would they be walking away? Well, what did they bring? Okay, Ukraine and the U.S. negotiators met in Paris. So according to Bloomberg, the U.S. is ready to recognize Crimea as Russian in Trump-pushed peace deal. So I can't make this up. Like they're actually thinking along these lines. Now, the U.S. peace proposal discussed in Paris would do a number of other bad things: freeze the front lines, leave occupied Ukrainian land under Russian control, and drop NATO membership plans. What does Ukraine exactly get out of this? That the fighting stops? Is that it? Like, because they're not. I see nothing here that is pro-Ukraine in this kind of arrangement. So apparently the U.S. was signaling that they're ready to walk away because Ukraine can't accept any of these terms, and they knew it. Meanwhile, President Trump's spiritual advisor, Pastor Mark Burns, who is just in Ukraine and actually saw what happened in Bucha and on the ground and talked to witnesses, says Putin is pure evil. Putin does not like President Trump. Russian mafia is attacking innocent people in Ukraine. Let's hear him for just a moment.
Yeah. Putin does not like President Trump. I know everybody's trying to make it out as though they're buddies. They're not. President Trump is the president of the greatest nation in the world, the United States of America. Russia has a dictator president and will kill off their enemies, kill off their political enemies. It is a mafia, and they are attacking innocent people in Ukraine. We need to make sure we're protecting Ukraine, because protecting Ukraine is America first.
Okay, so he has been converted from a very pro or anti-Russian sentiment to a very pro-Ukrainian or previously anti-Ukrainian sentiment to a very pro-Ukrainian sentiment. Okay. There's also no elections expected in Ukraine this summer. Martial law has just been extended until August 6th. They do this extension of every 6 months, and that was just passed. So that kind of thing that Putin wants, which is new elections so they can deal with a puppet regime, is off the table as well. Okay, Trump says that Ukraine talks are near a turning point and no one is playing me. He warns that the U.S. may step back from negotiations if either side resists compromise, and he's really speaking to the Ukrainian side. Now, on top of that, the U.S. is no longer considering new weapons for Ukraine, and that's bad. That's tragic. They're citing pro-Ukraine lawmakers. No guarantees on intel sharing either. That's also bad. The Trump administration is focused on what the U.S. gets from Ukraine, not what it can give. And here's the actual article itself. Noel Report is posting this. President Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer had a call to discuss a peaceful settlement to look at the language, the conflict in Ukraine. Just like Russia and other pro-Russia countries call it, they were avoiding the term full-scale invasion. That watered-down language is telling this is the disposition of the Trump administration. And, it's not unnoticed by the Russians. Medvedev praises Trump in giving Russia what they could never have dreamed of at any other point in the past 40 years. America is standing aside while Russia is rebuilding the USSR. Here's Dmitry Medvedev saying American officials have said that if there is no progress on the Ukraine case, the United States will wash its hands of it wisely, and the EU should do the same. Then Russia will figure it out faster. I'm sure they would like that, wouldn't they? Here's Dugan saying the same kind of praise for Trump. Trump has defeated deep state, but it tries to fight back. The continuation of U.S. participation in Ukrainian war is one of the main tools to get a grip on Trump by the globalists. So he's trying to tie those things together as if that's necessarily connected, and it's not. He will be controlled and stiffened by that. They hope. The victory should be defended. So he's praising Trump for what he's doing by not letting the globalists influence him into supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, Lithuania is worried about this as they're fortifying their border along the Suwalki Gap, against potential Russian invasion. Over 100 kilometers of roads, 8 bridges to be upgraded by 2028, plus new checkpoints and barriers, according to Politico. What's the Suwalki Gap? This red line here is a pipeline, so you can ignore it. This is Lithuania. I've been to Lithuania a few times, and beautiful country. This is Poland. Over here in between is this little enclave that's part of Russia, because after World War II, it was a German enclave. The Lithuanians didn't want it. The Poles didn't want it because there weren't Poles there. There weren't Lithuanians there, and Russia took it. Okay, this is Belarus, and this 100-kilometer stretch is called the Suwalki Gap. Well, it seems like Russia would want to connect Russia and Belarus in a meaningful way. And that's been something that they've even war-gamed and tried to prepare for. So it's not for no reason that Lithuania is thinking this way. Okay, EU could replace US aid to Ukraine with 0.2%. That's not 2%. That's 0.2% of GDP increase, according to the Kiel Institute. Now, would that be painful? Yes. It's billions of dollars? Yes. But the EU has the capacity to be able to do that. I hope it doesn't come to that, but they have the capacity. Rubio told NATO Secretary General Rutte that the U.S. may step back from mediating peace in Ukraine, per State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce. Quote, "We have global responsibilities. There has to be an endpoint. We can't have meetings about meetings for months or years." Okay, so they're signaling that they may very well be stepping back. Ukraine is the problem because Ukraine is not coming to the table with these terrible terms. And why would they? I mean, there's no reason that they would. Meanwhile, this is the next big story. The United States has to focus on a lot of other things, like the U.S. is withdrawing some, not entirely, from Syria. The United States will withdraw from 3 bases in northeastern Syria, including 2 positions designated to support counter ISIS operations along the Euphrates River. The U.S. troop presence in Syria will drop from 2,000 to 1,400 under the current drawdown plan. Now, the U.S. about 7 years ago, maybe it was about 7 years ago, really just destroyed ISIS after it was a plague during Obama's administration. And you got to give Trump credit for actually doing something about ISIS, and he did, but removing that presence, you got to be careful that otherwise it'll, like a disease, make a comeback. Okay, an unspecified senior Iranian official told Reuters on April 18th that Supreme Leader Khamenei will refuse any deal that requires Iran to dismantle centrifuges, halt uranium enrichment, or reduce its stockpile. Well, why would they? The lesson that we've gotten out of what's happened with Russia and Ukraine is you better have nukes, because if you have nukes, you can do all kinds of things that you couldn't do if you didn't have nukes. Iran's foreign minister has called for Russia to play a role in high-stakes negotiations over the fate of Tehran's nuclear program. And then here at Radio Free Europe, Iranian and U.S. negotiators are meeting for a second round of critical talks on Tehran's nuclear ambitions as the White House sent mixed messages of potential military action and new demands to Iran. Nikki Haley is commenting on this. She's the former U.S. ambassador, former political rival of Donald Trump, who lost in the primary. It is telling that the Iranian regime is asking Putin for help in dealing with the U.S. The Iranians will never agree to end enrichment in nuclear production. An Iran deal would be nothing more than Obama 2.0, which Trump criticized, but Trump may actually wind up doing some kind of deal like that. Okay, meanwhile, there's also another problem. That's the U.S. air campaign in Yemen. In Yemen, there are these Houthi rebels who are clogging up the Red Sea by attacking ships, and the U.S. is trying to do something about that. So the U.S. is spread way too thin here. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, struck Houthi fuel stockpiles in oil export and import facilities at Ras Isa Port. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that next name of, well, maybe I will. Hadiyada Governorate. A large portion of the U.S. airstrikes, an effort to degrade Houthi targeting capabilities and degrade other Houthi infrastructure. CENTCOM has conducted at least 112 airstrikes in at least 33 sorties targeting Houthi infrastructure since March 15th. That's not too long. An air campaign can only achieve temporary effects, though. And so this is a map. Here's where the ports are. And if you look at here, this is Yemen, and this whole section is controlled by the Houthis. And so, yeah, I mean, they have a real problem, and it's clogging up transit in the Red Sea. So you see where the strikes are around, in and around Yemen. And this is posted, get this, it's even more complicated. In Yemen, an analysis of available satellite imagery from a Chinese military-affiliated satellite company shows the vast majority of Houthi attacks took place in areas imaged by the Chinese company. Yeah, the Chinese might also have a hand in this as well. And, you know, the U.S. has to focus on what could kick off with Taiwan. So that's the best face potential reason that Trump wants to get this thing over with or be done with the war in Ukraine, because there are other problems around the world. Now, can you do that and just be done with it and just like ignore the Ukrainians? No, that's terrible. But that's the kindest reason for why this could be happening. Okay, Michael McFaul, former ambassador to Russia, now at Stanford, says even the best diplomat in the world, the best diplomat in history, could not handle negotiations with Russia, Iran, and Israel-Palestine all at the same time. Witkoff should be assigned to one and have someone else run point on the other accounts, preferably not Russia. Okay, at this point, I want to give a shout out. I'm actually putting this as a kind of a feature going forward because there are a lot of you who have been very helpful to me over time. I want to give this shout out to Ina. Ina is her husband's helped me quite a bit here recently, and I want to say thank you for lending him to me to help me improve some things. But she was asking him, like, why am I doing this for Ukraine? Am I Ukrainian? No. Do I have family that's Ukrainian? No. It's just that my values demand that I do something because I saw this injustice and wanted to speak up, and that's it. But Ina, when you see this shout out from now on, this is because of you that caused me to add this to my video. So you'll see that in the future. Okay, last little bit. This is the best metaphor I could think of what it's like to have Russians on your border. This is what the Lithuanians are feeling, what the Ukrainians are feeling, what the Georgians are feeling. This is a camera that's capturing this in Florida. There are some alligators just, hanging out at the doorstep, just, minding their own business. They don't want to hurt anybody. They're just, hanging out. But I'm sure that's a pretty good metaphor for those that live in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states and such. All right, my friends, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.